Welcome everyone, I am Admin1 of NEFX, and today we are doing a Total Carnage listen through of the latest Bull of Heaven release that just released this last week. As you might be aware, I've been into Bull of Heaven for some time. Some might consider me what they would call a true bully since the summer of 2012, so about 9 years now. And I've enjoyed the stuff they've made in all eras, such as they are. As far as I know right now, it's just Neil. I don't know if he still has revolving door of contributors that they've had in the past, but regardless, I did like the last release, and this latest one I haven't heard yet. It's called Say It Again, and it has 10 tracks of below double-digit length, which is in contrast to at least pieces from past eras where they were often at least an hour long. Although much of the time those releases were arguably tracks of this length smushed together into one piece for whatever reason. But regardless, we'll see what it's like, if it's sort of a drone ambient noise type of thing as they've normally done, or if it's a bit more of a departure in the vein of, say, what some might call synthwave or post-rock or whatever that they've also done. Just get right into it. Here's the first track called I Need Your Name. I may stop from time to time to comment on it. Let's skip past this commercial pretty quick. Okay, here we go. Okay, so there's already reason to believe that it's a bit of a departure, if we at least consider that, from their main default. It sounds already like, based on the rhythm, there's an electronic aspect to it, then there's a guitar coming in that's already kind of droning a little bit, but that's just a few seconds in. Yeah, so I'm going to say they, because I don't know who all is involved with this track or this album, but they're letting the guitar really ring out with all these subtly different chords atop this very classic electronic beat with some shouting over the top. So it's really big. They're kind of letting it ring to let the impact of it set in, while still having this hard electronic beat to help give it a sense of place. And at this point, the vocals that are kind of distorting and melding together, so it almost sounds like it's transitioning into almost like a synth-sounding layer of its own. So far, it sounds like the chordal pattern has remained more or less the same. It's being repeated often enough to give it its own distinct section, but what's interesting is that the strumming is increasing, so there's less pauses between the notes, the strums, even though the actual melodic progression is much the same, so everything is starting to turn into this kind of amorphous blob, but there's still that beat underneath that's stayed constant and has enough pauses between the hits. I wonder if at some point that will start changing as well, because that would be a pretty cool effect to have, the guitars, the vocals, the drums, the whatever else happening start increasing and, I guess, hit count, if you will, until it turns into something really big and ambient, and then that could be used as a launch pad for something else. Because already I'm starting to hear points where the vocals are manipulated, like pitch shifted aggressively for like a split moment. So it starts to sound almost like a noise, as though it weren't even sampled from vocals at all. Like, there may be a point where if you were to listen to it, from that point without having heard the beginning of what came before it, you might think that it was something totally different from what it is. Like, things starting to sound like they're melting, which I think it's kind of reflective of the album art. Like, I don't know who exactly is in those pictures behind those black scribbles. Seems familiar, but I can't quite place it at the moment. If someone knows who it is, sorry, behind those scribbles, please say so. But it's like the personal is being slowly manipulated and changed into something kind of impersonal. So I wonder if there's some digital stretching involved with some of these layers, because I know when I think back to that Total Carnage listen through I did of the Irons album, where Irons did say that he used a cassette recorder, basically. I know that Bull of Heaven used cassette recorders a lot, at least in the early tracks. I don't know if that's true here or not. It sounds more like it was done digitally using some kind of interface like Logic. It can certainly be replicated to a degree using Logic, but I wonder what kind of sounds, at least how the sounds were achieved for the drums, because they're very clashing, very tinny. They still poke out amidst all the din that's happening on top of it with the vocal rambling, the guitars. And actually at this point I should say the guitars, there's like an extra layer that I think at least follows the initial chord progression, but it's a bit more high register, and I think the notes are just slightly different, but it's in the same scale. And the bass line is much the same too. Like, I think the initial guitar line being more spare, like where they would just let chords ring out. I think the bass followed that, and the bass is the same more or less as it was at the beginning, with the guitars changing around it. Yeah. Alright, that was a nice climatic build-up. It finally released, and for a bit it was just the guitars, but they were kind of tapering off. Now this next track is called Who Wants Some? I wonder how many of these ads will need to skip.
That look is a look that can only happen by a roaring fire at a Verbo cabin while the kid.
Interesting. So, heard like a string of notes. I mean, it kind of released again into this floating chord. I'm already hearing speech samples again, but this time it's more comprehensible. I heard someone say, "Who wants some?" which of course is the track's title. And again, there's electronic beat happening that sounds like it has the same kind of sound as the older one, previous one I should say, but it's slower, or I should say it's a bit sparser, so there's more room for the guitars to have space on the top while still having this kind of rhythmic anchor to it. So it sounds more floaty than the last one. And the melody also sounds a bit more free-floating this time too, like it's staying within a scalar boundary, so to speak, but it sounds more ambient from the get-go, where any anchoring is relying mainly upon the drum beat. And there's a thing where it's hard to say whether the guitar line is heavily reverb with strumming, or if it's more like an open chord that's being allowed to ring, or like what effects are being used on it. It may well be both. I'm starting to hear little variations creep in, like there's another sample of voices that's happening a bit underneath the one that's mainly at the top, and it's a bit more panning left. And though the beat has remained pretty simple and constant, there's been a few extra hits thrown in here and there. When I hear the vocal effects, it sounds like they're being oscillated very quickly, like over the course of a split second. Something about them is being raised and lowered in a flash. It'd be interesting to know what types of effects are being used on these vocals, you know, how this effect was achieved, and if it's a continuation of past techniques, because of course Full of Heaven has a lot of tracks with speech being manipulated and changed to sound like something different. But so far in this track, it sounds like there's still that kind of human element. This is just subjective interpretation, of course, but it doesn't sound yet as much like it's been changed into a inhuman or otherwise unvocal sound. It still sounds like someone's talking, but it's all muffled in a way. Whereas in the last track, it sounded like, again, like something, you know, fairly human was slowly being blurred into something else, but there was still that beat underneath it. This still has a beat underneath it the whole way as well, at least so far. And it's interesting when I hear the lower end of the melody start to cut out at this point, and there's more just the high register melodies just kind of droning over the top, like the same note but a higher octave, and it gives more of an air of suspense about the whole thing, or of being kind of suspended in the air. It's a very skybound sound. So it's interesting. So far, it seems like maybe at least one of the compositional themes of this release is, and it's not, you know, uncommon to Bull of Heaven, or indeed perhaps a lot of music in this field, but it's like it's staying within, you know, certain melodic parameter, but it's using, you know, changing manipulation or pitch or, you know, layer density to kind of give an arc to it. So it's like you're staying in the same zone mentally, but it's like you're going through a progression of it or something. It's hard to explain. I'm not conveying it very well. It's sounding very vague. But this next track is called And I Feel It. So I'm hearing strings now. They're starting to build up. In the meantime, there's a kind of descending guitar melody. All the notes are reverberating. And there's a slight, at least beginning of a drum beat, mainly in the hi-hats, but I'm hearing something else amidst it. Sounds like some kind of light, almost bell-based percussion instrument. Something that has a bit of a jingling noise, but it's you know, it's quick and subdued. Here again, there are speech samples, I think, but they're lower and already manipulated, so hearing what sounds like laughter is kind of building up in volume. Now it's tapering off, but it sounded kind of rhythmic, like it was maybe the same little blurb of speech or vocal noise sampled over and over again, along with something else, like maybe another light percussion instrument, but it's reverberating. So it's doing this thing, it's kind of going up and down in intensity while repeating, up and down in volume as well, where it kind of goes a bit higher up in the mix and then recedes back. And now it kind of sounds like guitar sounds and string sounds are blurring together into this big, lush drone. I should add, by the way, for those who aren't hearing this, these drones are pretty melodic overall. It's not, what one might call guitar noise or whatever. There's elements of that, as there have been, of course, in previous Bull of Heaven pieces, some of which are more about the noise than about, let's say, what you could hear if you, played a key on the piano or something like that. But here, there are definitely noise elements, but it's overall a melodic thing, and the prevailing feeling is one of dread, suspense, of being kind of lost in a forbidden land, if you will. Now it's kind of calming down a bit, but there's still this undercurrent of dread. Things are still rising and falling, but right now it's a bit less rhythmic. When I say things, I mean noises. I heard what sounded like a quick little cough. It sounds like whoever's responsible for manipulating these vocal samples is having a good time. Like they're trying these different things over the course of a track. Even if they're the same things they've tried in previous tracks, it's like they're running the gamut of what you can do with these vocal samples. At least in this musical context, to give it whatever feeling. One of dread, one of confusion. Oh wow. Now everything after it's kind of built up to this climax is suddenly tapering off with only reverberation, where it's like most of it's not actively being played or sampled anymore. It's just relying on reverberation of what was played or sampled before to maintain its presence, but it's mostly getting quieter. Like there are a few blurbs popping up right now, some of which sound fairly new, but now what's mainly prevailing high in the mix is that constant little percussion beat. Ooh. This is interesting too, because vocal samples are now being manipulated to sound kind of melodic, which is possible they already are, but previous ones didn't sound that way. And the frequency and timbre of it is such that it sounds like it blends with high-pitched guitar line or something. For all I know, there's some Peter Frampton-esque things going on right now. But it's mostly that poking up ominously from like this very low, suspicious drone, and that constant indelible percussion beat that's stayed at more or less the same volume and intensity the whole time. Every now and then I hear what sounds like a light synth drum hit that also reverberates. So it's like the track never lets you fully rest. Maybe we'll towards the end when it all kind of winds down, but sounds almost like a singing chipmunk, but given the atmosphere of the track, it's as though you are, once again, and I'm kind of repeating myself from what I talked about, feeling when I heard the Irons release. It sounds like you're in the heart of some alien environment, and you're close to some kind of mysterious force that you're not sure may be ominous or not. It's it's unsettling. And that's one of the types of feelings I love to get from Bull of Heaven pieces, and I've gotten it from a lot of their pieces in many different ways. One way that I've gotten it in a totally different fashion, because this next release I'm talking about is a musique concrète piece, I think is how you pronounce it. It's called boxes of scorpions released by Tripwire. And that's an entire piece that's over 1.5 hours long. But actually, come to think of it, there was at least one sample in there that sounded kind of like this. It was more of a constant static loop, but it had about this same pitch and sound. It sounded like some kind of alien chipmunk-esque creature singing. It was kind of fading in and out. It was like you were inside of some alien structure, and at different points when you were navigating it, you would come closer to the source of the sound, and other times you would go away and go through all these tunnels. That's the feeling I got from that release, and I get it in a different way with this track, which is of course shorter and of a somewhat different nature. One might say more musical. But anyway, I'm liking this. I know it sounds weird, but I enjoy the sense of doom that you can get from Bull of Heaven pieces. It's like you're experiencing the intrigue of horror without the unpleasantness of actually dealing with it in real life. Okay, now I'm hearing a comprehensible speech sample. It sounds like it's taken from some kind of a radio skit. A state of desperate terror, I heard. This track is called Into Dreamy Narcosis. Oh, hey. That's interesting. It sounds like it's going to be something more slow and subdued, and then you get this pretty up-tempo, at least relatively to the rest of the album so far. Sorry, kind of electronic. I'm hearing this kind of low, staticky, distorted sound slowly rising up, with the speech samples now sounding a bit more cut up again. I get the feeling that there's going to be some kind of big kickoff or explosive launch into a melody or something of sorts. I'm hearing another, what sounds like a guitar sound. That initial distorted line is still rising, not only in volume, but I think also in pitch, and now it's being affected. But the new higher pitched one is starting to take on its own melody, yet it's staying at more or less the same point in the mix, whereas the initial line is actually rising past it. Now it's starting to go back down in pitch and volume, slowly. And the higher guitar line sounds like it's transitioning through sets of basically two-note interactions. So it's like bouncing between two notes, and then it kind of lowers in pitch or goes further down the fretboard to do the same thing, and then starts rising back up again. And it's all what sounds like in a preset scale, more or less. So now, in contrast to the first few tracks, it sounds like you're kind of rushing through someplace. And I'm not just saying that because there's a faster, more aggressive drum beat, but also just the way that the guitars are progressing. There's just more happening, more going on. And there's that same sense of doom about it, but it's more like actively trying to escape frantically rather than, hopelessly wandering about. It sounds like that initial guitar line that started out as a more low, staticky drone. There's still a bit of a distortion behind it, but I think it's starting to take on a melody of its own now, whereas before it sounded more like it was just rising. But now it's doing it again. It seems like when it rises, there's an effect on top of it that reduces its melodicness, if you will, makes it a bit more like a noise, almost like a sci-fi noise of sorts. And yeah, I'm wondering what the logic behind the patterns of some of these layer manipulations, if you will. You know, if there's like a preset pattern or if it's more purely improvised. It sounds like it's somewhere between both. Because I don't know how Neil and company think, so to speak, but I imagine myself, you know, I've been experimenting with different um, sound manipulations or effects on sounds, find ones that seem to work best, and then, you know, make like a little blueprint out of them, and then put improvisation into them. Then I heard it's weird that music tapered off very quickly towards the end, and then I heard someone say it's a drag. Almost sounded like a lowered speech sample of Charles Manson again, who they've sampled a lot of in the past. This one's called The Night Primal, and already what's striking me about it is that there's a constant, very distinctive looped melody. It sounds like it's using a synthesizer. It's like an arpeggio or something like that. Now I'm hearing what sound like these howls. They kind of rise and fall, and then after a certain point, they just they stop and they're just reverberated. So I might be influenced by the title of the track, because it does say The Night Primal, and it does sound very nocturnal in a way, and with, you know, howling noises that call to mind, say, a wolf howling at the moon. But this sounds now like we're in some kind of outside terrain, trying to either navigate it or remain inside from the dangers of a night that only come out at night. It's interesting because the howls, I don't know how much they might be melodically affected or manipulated, but they seem to kind of cross the boundary between, you know, standard melody and just sheer noise, like you might expect if you were to sample a scream straight up. And at times, there some of these drones, these howling sounds, they sound like they could either be actual sampled vocal noises of sorts, or that they could be some kind of synth play that's, you know, just manipulated or played in a way that sounds like an actual vocal howl. It's cool because the synthesizer line, the kind of arpeggio sounding thing, I might be bugging that. I'm not that musically aware, as you could probably tell, but you know, it's very active and constant. It's like constant 16th notes or whatever, but the beat underneath it is plodding. It's like at least half time. And now what's happening is that parts of that synth line are, you know, staying constant and melodic, and there's at least another layer of it that's manipulated and again crossing the boundary between melody and noise because it's being shifted up and down, and at times it sounds like the notes are quickly tapering off, and then they're kind of dragged back up in a way that sounds almost like the noise of something being sucked through a pneumatic tube. But I will say that even though the howls are kind of haunting, the prevailing mood, at least as given by the synth voice, sounds like more one of intrigue or wonder than of sheer doom and gloom. I also like how, you know, even though the beat and the synth line are pretty constant. The howls, they drop at different points. It sounds like they might be looped at about the same frequency or rate, but that rate isn't the same as that of the beat and the synth voices. So it's like they land on different points of the beat. And all of a sudden it stops, and then you hear one last howl that's tapering off in reverberation.
We're all persuading.
This next track is called "Say It Again."
Is part of our lives. It's like the weather.
This is definitely reminding me of a lot of what I enjoyed about Weed Problem 2 to 5, which is a commonly liked Bull of Heaven piece. Even some of their detractors admit that it's very good. Right now, it sounds like we might be more back to the low, gloomy doom drone. Not even a beat has yet popped up out of the den, which was the case for the previous tracks. Like you have a few seconds where you think you might know where it's going, and then something quick would drop in, like it'd be a speech sample or a drum beat. That could still happen here, but what's happening here is that there are these two droning lines that seem to hit at the same time. It's like they're just hitting something on a guitar, bass, or synth, and they're letting it ring out, and they hit it again at the same time, and they're of different pitches or octaves, but sound like they're the same note so far. Then there's another line that's kind of scribbling around. It sounds almost like something sliding across a surface. And this third one I'm talking about is interesting because it not only, again, blurs the line between noise and melody, but also between what instrument or nature of the melody sounds like if there aren't several of these being combined, namely, a speech sample that's manipulated, or a guitar, or a synth, or whatever. That's another thing I like about this album and Bull of Heaven in general, is the way that, after a certain point, they're able to melt these different elements together into like its own thing. It becomes this whole mysterious alien voice instead of something that you can quickly recognize and identify. It doesn't even sound anymore like it's different layers put together. It sounds like this one thing, because all those layers have been so manipulated and combined that it's just something else entirely. That's especially interesting because it makes you think of something other than what you can identify in human terms, whether it be just an instrument or someone talking. We have certain conditioned responses to those types of things, and then when it gets taken out into Andromeda like this, it's like something else you have to contend with and really think about and engage with. And I love that sort of thing about Bull of Heaven. So yeah, it sounds like it was just that drone. It's already starting to taper off. Yeah, now it's just those initial two drones I was talking about together, but actually one of them sounds like it's going more constantly, and the other is still being wrung out at certain intervals. It's still kind of like it has a bit of a scraping or sliding noise. Yeah, but it's just that one lower drone, and then it just goes quiet. So I think that's the end. There probably won't be any jump outs in those last few seconds. Nope. So this next one is called The Name of Love.
I was wondering when you guys would come back.
You know who we are.
Your Clone Force Night.
All right. This one starts off with a clear speech sample, but it's lower. Sounds like it might be another Charles Manson one. And then immediately hear this kind of rhythmic synth hits that are low. Now, of course, you're hearing a drum beat with a higher pitched synth riff that locks in with it. And there's another sliding noise on the top, like it's of the same synth voice, but it's kind of it's shifting between notes. It almost sounds like harmonics sung on a guitar, but made to sound a bit smoother and, you know, less, I guess, less choppy and defined, the way that, you know, guitar harmonics often sound. Yeah, this is the most exquisitely electronic track so far. And there's even like a higher pitched line happening right now that sounds like what you might hear in techno or something. It sounds like it might be playing kind of a constant melody, but that, you know, it's being run through effects once again, where it's it has kind of unclear pitch, like almost microtonal in a way. Like it reaches like a kind of screeching pitch at a certain point, but it's since been lowered again. Oh, this is interesting. I always like this when I hear a Bolt Heaven track. There's a melody that's kind of happening underneath it all. It almost sounds like there might be little picks on a guitar or on a synth, but it sounds almost like industrial noises. By which I mean not just industrial, the music genre, but actual, you know, steel hitting steel, you know, work noises. Construction noises, perhaps. And it's of a certain pitch that lines up with everything here, but it's not following the same rhythm. So, like, it falls at different points on the beat. It's like following its own rhythm, but it's still sparse enough that it fits in. It doesn't drown everything out. The beat cuts out, and now it's just the industrial noises. Even the speech is cut out. So, oh, there's another one. Now they almost sound like these digital church bells of doom. Dong. You'll hear me use the word doom a lot with Bull of Heaven. I enjoy music of various sorts and various dominant moods, but there's something to be said for feeling doomed with music. Alright, this next one is called Junebug. Boy, here we go. Okay, I'm trying to get a hold on everything that's happening here, as distinct from what's happened before. So there's this low, rumbling, rhythmic hit, and like a synth, it's so low it almost sounds like they're hitting on a drum. And then there's another line that sounds sort of like the industrial noises that I heard in the previous track, but no longer like hits, rather this constant sliding. And then I'm hearing another line. It's hard to explain what it sounds like, but it sounds like one of those comedy noises almost, but with the pitch lowered and it's affected to sound more serious. Like, there are speech samples again here, but for the most part I can't make out what's being said. There is a beat as well, but it's much sparser. It's more like a constant hi-hat count with occasional like kicks to help like heighten the sense of suspense. The speech samples, it almost sounds like we're hearing something from a television right now. That's the feeling I get, like something from a TV screen. So if we go with our previous premise of being inside an alien structure, we're passing through this dark area with, something of alien nature being broadcast. Where maybe where the speech is coming from is the sole source of light. I wish I could come up with the right words to describe what one of these noises or lines I'm hearing sounds like to me. Because I'm sure there's a understandable, relatable reference, but I can't place it right now. Chances are, though, you might be able to hear it at least somewhat through my headphones, or you could check it out for yourself and maybe identify in the comments what you think I might be talking about or how it might sound. I'm interested in everyone's input. This is always a good, wait a minute. Alright, I'll get to this in a moment, but this is always a good technique that's used in music like this where, you build layers into a climax for something, then you take out certain layers, especially old ones, so that the newer ones can shine more on their own, and it helps change the meaning of a track and also help kind of complete the climatic arc of the track, if that's what you're going for. But anyway, what I was going to say at the end of that track was that it sounded like it had just faded out, except for speech samples that were kind of mixed together and almost sounded like a collage of babbling. And then it ended suddenly. So now we're on the penultimate track called Love You. Oh, interesting. So I hear some kind of a noise or vocal sample that's being played at a consistent rhythm, but it's like it's a quick rise in the pitch and volume. So it's like a fading in noise, almost like an alarm. So now the beat is kicked in. It's fairly kick heavy. I should mention though that most of the beats haven't sounded as abrasive as the one in the opening track did. That's just an observation. It's not better or worse per se. But it's cool because you got these synth noises that are kind of fading in and out, where they don't dominate the whole way. They kind of recede into the background for a while. They even seem to fade back into like a constant smooth drone instead of the punchy line they become, which we might associate again with electronica or synthwave. Actually, a lot of these layers, they don't stay constantly. Like they disappear, and then just when you think they might be gone for good, they just pop back in, like that initial alarm sounding noises I talked about. And now it's gone back to just this low, constant synth punching. Then that higher pitched one that fades in and out. It almost sounds like this could be something of a parody of, let's say, 80s pop or whatever, because some of the sounds are there, and of course there's someone, yelping, "I love you," over the top of it. But it's all chopped and screwed, and it sounds kind of off. Now I'm hearing this kind of aggressive sweeping noise. So it almost sounds like maybe what they did, Bowl of Heaven that is that they came up with all these synth lines that fit together melodically, and not only put them through different effects, but would mute or fade out different layers at different points, so that the track is always transforming, but it always sounds like it's in the same zone, so to speak. Like right now, I'm just hearing that one higher pitched one. So that was cool. It was like just one big cavalcade of all those layered
I was
ideas.
wondering when you guys would come back.
You know who we are.
You'll climb Force 99.
It might be another one of my favorites, The One Love You. So this is the last track of this new Bowl of Heaven release called It's the Best. And right now, it's just all these different vocal samples mixed together. Almost like you've opened a portal to hell and all the souls are taking vengeance or something. But now, there's a drone creeping in that clashes melodically with, at least what sounds like could have been something of a melody of the voices. But it wasn't really like it was a melody per se. It sounded like they were almost going for it, so you might think that a drone going underneath it would sound different. But now that this new one has come along, the voices sound more just like pure noise. Now they're receding though. Now it's just the drones. And they're getting this kind of almost like a percussive thing happening. But it almost sounds like a reverse wind noise used as a hi-hat. And there's light subtle splashes of what sounds like static or distortion. So here again, there are different lines that are fading in and out, or only hitting occasionally, albeit seemingly at a constant rhythm or loop, but all the notes are about the same pitch, or maybe different octaves for the same note, or at least pretty close. It's like this one constant chord that's constantly being transformed and having different frequencies emphasized at different points. I think that might just be to fade out the whole album, as if to treat it all as one piece, which of course has often been the case, at least historically, with Bowl of Heaven pieces, or releases, I should say. But I will say now that the predominant mood is more of a release or sense of escape, not just in the notes used, but I think in just the mood of it all, and the serenity. It's as though, you've escaped the doom for now. Alright everyone, that was the latest Bowl of Heaven release. Looks like this came out July 5th. The album was called Say It Again. And I hope to hear more again, which I'm sure will happen. Bowl of Heaven is historically already the most prolific music act of all time. Or, to be more broad about it, recording act, since some may say that what they do is more noise rather than music. I don't care either way. I like pretty much all of it. And I'm always interested in hearing what they do next. And hopefully this may help convert more people to Bowl of Heaven, so to speak. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what all they do or what they're supposedly limited to. They have all sorts of styles that they explore, all sorts of different techniques they use to produce their music, and it's not just someone, holding down Control V on a sample of electric fan noises. Although there are a few releases like that, but even those are, kind of interesting just in kind of imagining, how they made it, or what new sounds or range of sounds they can get out of sampling something and putting effects on it or running it through whatever it is they've done at different points over time. I'm sure they used computer algorithms or something. I think Clayton did. But at any rate, good job, Neil, and whoever else is involved in this. I look forward to hearing more. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye.